Hey there, friends. Hey there, family. Welcome back to the Lifepoint Leadership Podcast. I'm so glad that you're with us. And if you don't know this, if no one has encouraged you in this recently, but you are a leader, and we want you to know that. And whether you maybe serve on our volunteer dream team at Lifepoint Church, or maybe you lead in your family, you lead at work, or you're just joining us because someone shared this video or this podcast with you, welcome. And what we want to do is encourage you today in your leadership. And something that you may not realize as a leader is that every leader deals with culture. So what we're going to talk about today is the idea of culture. And while culture on a team or in an organization or in a church, it's not necessarily difficult to shape it. It does require intentionality to shape it. And culture is either something that you create or that you allow. What we want to make sure we do at Lifepoint Church, and we want to encourage you and equip you to do as well, is to land on the proactive side of that, to make sure that you're spending your energy creating healthy culture and holding your team and holding people accountable to living that out. Well, what we're going to do today is take you inside of an event that we had recently that we call Culture Conference. It's where we gather an army of volunteers at Lifepoint Church. We call them the Dream Team, and they really make the dream become a reality around here. They serve week in and week out in so many different capacities. But we gathered them together, and one part of that conference was our lead pastor, Pastor Jeff, sharing about the early days and the founding moments of the culture of Lifepoint. It was so encouraging and inspiring that we wanted to share it with you today. And as you're taking notes, and if you've never taken notes before for a podcast, let this be the first one. Grab a notebook, grab a pen, grab some paper, maybe your phone, get ready to take some notes. And as you do, I believe you're going to be inspired by the story of how even in the early days, before Lifepoint Church even physically existed, that God was shaping a culture inside of our senior pastor so that he could shape that inside of our church. So as you listen today, may God inspire you, encourage you, and I'll come back at the end to give you a few closing thoughts and a couple of challenges that you can take away. But in the meantime, enjoy Pastor Jeff sharing about a presence-driven culture.
It's been my hope that what we've been able to create is a place that where people can have encounters with Jesus. We learned a lot over the journey. We learned a lot of what to do and what not to do. But there's something special about a culture that desires the presence of God. You know, when Jesus started his ministry, he invited people to follow him. You could say the way of Jesus was more caught than taught. Like, did he teach? Absolutely, yes, Jesus taught. But the disciples were definitely challenged. While they were challenged by his teaching, I would argue that they were changed by his living. They were shaped by his living. You know, there's this ancient Jewish saying that says, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. And the idea was this: may you follow so closely to your rabbi that the dust of his sandals begins to coat your life. That as you follow Jesus, you start to look like Jesus and you live like Jesus. And in order for the disciples to experience the life of Jesus, they had to follow the lifestyle of Jesus. In essence, they caught his culture. And then we know that when Jesus sent them to the ends of the earth, they carried that culture with them. And I think about the culture of Jesus. It was a culture of anticipation. People constantly wonder, like, we want to be where Jesus is because we just don't know what he's going to do. There was a culture of excellence. It was said of him, he does all things well. A culture of compassion. Jesus met people at their moment of need. A culture of grace. He forgave people. There was a culture of truth. He told people what they needed to hear, not just what they wanted to hear. There's a culture of prayer. In essence, Jesus was showing them that while they're living in the culture of earth, it is possible to experience the culture of heaven. That's what we're trying to give people. Jesus said, may your will be done, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And it's the job of the believer to usher in the culture of heaven. It's like when Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Hang with me, I want you to catch the culture of Christ. And the longer an organization exists, this is why what we're doing today is so important. The longer an organization exists, the further it tends to drift from its origins and the fuzzier the vision and the culture can become. Because drift happens, am I right? Drift happens. Just last weekend, I went out and got on my surfboard for the first time in ages, went with some friends to Surf City. I haven't been there in 20 years. And so I don't know the coastline of Surf City. We went out, we surfed for an hour. I got out of the water. Guys, I didn't know which way I had drifted. I'm standing there with my longboard, and I'm like, well, I don't know. That looks familiar, and then that looks familiar. The pier's over there, but we were And I just stood there for a moment, and eventually I found my bearings and found my spot, and then I watched my son Emery get out of the water, and he walked in the whole wrong direction. And I was like, watch, we'll see when he figures it out. And eventually he did. He started wandering back. And in life, drift happens. We can desire one thing, but if we're not careful, we'll drift from it. And I think that what we're doing is so important. We can't allow drift to happen. We've got to stay focused on what God is calling us to do. And so what I want to do this morning, in the little bit of time that I've got, is I wish I had a time machine. And I wish I could load all of us up and go back to a few key moments along the journey. But I realized something, that over the journey of Lifepoint, I've had this practice off and on of journaling and just writing down moments that God was doing something significant and something special. I thought if it's okay with you, I'd love to take you, if I could get in our DeLorean and punch in the dates. That's a Back to the Future reference for those of you that younger folks. DeLorean is a car company that used to, I think they're coming back is what I hear. But if it's okay, I'd love to take you to just a few moments. First place I would want to take you is spring of 2005. I'm a youth pastor at a church in the Raleigh area called C3 Church, and this was a dream come true to be at this church. We were an ARC church. I remember when my brother started attending there, he's like, it's amazing. We meet in a school. Pastor's wearing khakis. I was like, can you wear khakis to church? Get out of here. I know that sounds weird to some of you guys, but where I was, the church I was working at, we wore suits. And I was like, these guys are wearing khakis. They met in a school. They had drums. I was like, does the Lord know that you've got drums at his house? and he started telling me about this church, and I said, it'd be amazing to work at a church that just had a heart to reach people that weren't going to church. That was such a foreign idea. And so I get the opportunity to come on staff, and in spring of 2005, they took our staff to this ARC conference, Association of Related Churches. And I'm sitting in Baton Rouge where I have my first ever crawfish boil, and I'm listening to them talk about leadership and church planting, and something inside of me, like a switch gets flipped. And I am feverishly taking notes about church planting, and I'm like, wait, why do I care? And I had no idea that God was beginning to plant some seeds in my heart. And I remember talking to my wife, like, is this crazy? I'm thinking, got these thoughts about planting a church. There's no way I could be like a senior pastor. Look at me. This doesn't look like senior pastor. And I remember hearing God, not in an audible way, but in my spirit, it was just two simple words that I began to hear repeatedly as the words, trust me. Trust me. I thought, okay, well, I love my job, I love where I'm at. No desire to do this. And then it was summer of 2005, my wife and I, it was literally on our anniversary, June 6th of 2005. You know you're in youth ministry when you spend your anniversary riding to summer camp with a bus full of teenagers. That's what we were doing. Happy anniversary, babe. I took you to the beach and summer camp with 55 teenagers. And it was sitting at this summer camp that I remember Louis Giglio speaking. I've got it in my journal here. And I could have swore I was the only person in the room. I had been pushing to the back of my mind this idea of planting a church. I was like, no way, never, not me, wrong number, call someone else. And I remember sitting, listening to Louis Giglio when he literally said, God's given you everything you need to do everything He's calling you to do. What are you waiting on? And I remember that night just saying, okay, God, I got zero concept of what it will take to do this, but I'm in. I went out that night, sat at the beach. The moon was out. I started journaling. I got real poetic. I won't read you that entry. It's a little embarrassing. I drew a picture of the beach. It was amazing. Say something to my wife, and she's always had more faith in me than I've had in me. I should just say, she's always had more faith than me. Always. And so I was like, well, where do you even go? Where do you plant? I don't know where to plant a church. And I was like, if we're gonna bet the farm, let's just go crazy. I'm like, well, babe, here, what if we go to New York City? And she's like, she put her foot down. She's like, no, you were not taking my kids to New York City. I was just trying to, where's the most people? I mean, if we're gonna fail, let's fail really good. So we spent the next couple weeks just praying and saying, God, where would you have us to go? And it was 2 weeks later, it was June the 19th, it was a Sunday evening. We had 3 services at church that morning. I had 2 services in our youth ministry that night. And after our youth ministry, I took a couple out to get pizza because they were moving out of the area. They'd been serving in my youth ministry. They were great leaders. And I took them out to appreciate them. And I wasn't prepared for where the conversation was going to go. Because he looks at me, the husband looks at me and he says, I need to tell you something and this is gonna be weird. He says, I think we're supposed to start a church in Wilmington and you're supposed to be the pastor. Guys, my prayer has been, God, make it obvious to me. Nobody knows anything. I'm a pretty thick-headed guy, not the brightest bulb on the strand. Like, can it get any more obvious than somebody that I've never breathed a word about church planning to go, hey, I think we're supposed to start a church and you're supposed to be the pastor. I'm like Forrest Gump. I'm like, I may not be a smart man. I come home that Sunday night. I'm like, honey, she wasn't at the dinner. I was like, so let me tell you what happened. I tell her on Sunday night, and she goes, I could see that happening. I mean, you shot down every other place I've thrown out there, and now you could see this. So we're like, picture 2005. We are Googling everything we can learn about Wilmington. How many people, how many churches, is there even a need? And so that was Sunday night on June 19th. Monday, June 20th, I'm riding with Daryl Strickland to the hospital to just check on somebody. And those of you that know me, man, I don't keep secrets real well. Please don't tell me to keep something a secret. I will die. You're like, hey, listen, you can't tell anybody. I'm like, but I want to tell people. And I just got to tell somebody about this crazy conversation. And my wife, she's losing her mind because she's on board too. And I need to go to the most level-headed person I can trust who will talk me out of this. Daryl Strickland is the most level-headed, logical person. And I start telling him, ready for him to be like, what are you even talking about? This is the dumbest idea ever. And instead he looks at me and he goes, I could do Wilmington. I'm like, no. My whole thing was, God, here's what I love to do. I love to write sermons and preach sermons and hang out with people and drink coffee. That's it. I don't do systems and strategy and organization and 501c3 and setting up a bank account or communicating, organizing a lease with a school, and that's just not me. And God says, trust me. God knows how you're gifted, and he knows what you need even before you know what you need. And on the 21st, I wrote in my journal, if it's okay, I'd love to share with you just a few things from my journal. And 6/21 of 2005, I wrote this down. I said, God, there's a picture of my journal. Feels a little vulnerable right here. God, what I wouldn't give to see what you're up to. Could you really be steering us towards Wilmington? How insane could that be? I have a difficult time expressing in words the excitement that it generates in me. Of course I'm a bit freaked out. How will we eat? Hey, these are the real questions. Where will we live? But then that's a small task for you. Clothing the fields with grass, dressing the flowers in beautiful colors, painting the sky with the brush of your hand, providing for Jeff's family? Why not? I just want to tell you right now that I will go. Wow, it feels so good to say that. Yes, I'm in. I don't have a clue how, but then again, that's your department. I just want to be in the story, your story. Please continue to confirm in me the direction. And until then, give me the strength to stay faithful.
What a fantastic teaching. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I know you've probably got a phone or a page full of notes. So what I want to do is not add any more to that, but I want to give you a quick, maybe couple of challenges or action steps out of this episode. And here's one. For those of you who lead on the team at Lifepoint, which is really what this podcast is all about, is helping those of you who serve in a volunteer capacity or you lead a volunteer team. It's helping you lead better and go further in that leadership. And for you, here's the challenge for you, is that of the notes that you've taken, of the story of the culture of Lifepoint, at least the snapshot that you got, how can you extract something from what you heard Pastor Jeff say and encourage your team in that this weekend? You know, culture is oftentimes telling or retelling the story of God's faithfulness and telling or retelling the story of why we do the things we do the way that we do them. So I would encourage you to pull one piece of that story into maybe your team huddle as you lead it this weekend, or maybe a time that you have in your small group, and to invest a part of that story into the culture of your team. Another takeaway would be for those of you who maybe you don't lead a team, you may be part of one, or maybe you in no capacity at all are a part of Lifepoint Church, but you are leading. What you heard Pastor Jeff share was his story. And it's the story of what God did in him and spoke to him and shaped and molded inside of him. And my encouragement to you is that in the same way that the Lord did that in his life and he shaped vision and culture inside of Pastor Jeff's heart, God's doing the same thing through your story. So in the same way that he took notes and journaled out the things that God was speaking to him and maybe the concerns and fears and confidence that it birthed inside of him, I want to encourage you to do the same thing, because when you write those prayers down and you document those things God is saying to you, you're not just writing your story, but you're actually scripting your culture. And sometimes you need things that you can look back on and be reminded that, oh yeah, I remember when God said that to me, and it gives me the strength to keep shaping the culture that's in front of me. So hopefully this has been encouraging to you. Hopefully this entire podcast series has been, and if you are new to it, we want you to remind you that this is a season of podcast episodes. We've got about 6 or 7 of them total, and they're releasing out the way that they are. Hopefully you're along for the ride. And I would encourage you, if this has ministered to you, encouraged you, challenged you in any way, hey, share this with a friend and articulate to them why you're sharing it with them. And we believe God's going to use you to make an impact in their life. All right, thanks for being here. We will see you on the next episode of the Lifepoint Leadership Podcast.